The scent of iron hung heavy in the rain-soaked alley, mixing with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of wet concrete. Natalie pressed her back against the brick wall, her breath coming in sharp, visible puffs in the October cold. The paramedic uniform clung to her skin, damp with sweat and something darker she didn't want to identify. Her hands trembled as she fumbled through the medical bag, muscle memory guiding fingers that moved with practiced precision despite the chaos in her mind. She couldn't remember her last name, couldn't remember how she'd gotten here, crouched in this narrow passage between two crumbling buildings on Chicago's South Side. But her hands knew exactly which vial to grab, exactly how much epinephrine to draw into the syringe. The knowledge felt foreign and familiar at once, like wearing someone else's clothes that somehow fit perfectly. A low groan echoed from deeper in the alley. Natalie's head snapped up, her pulse hammering against her throat. Through the curtain of rain, she could make out a figure slumped against a dumpster, motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Blood pooled beneath him, dark as oil under the flickering streetlight. Her feet moved before her mind could catch up. Training overrode fear. Instinct overrode the voice screaming at her to run. She dropped to her knees beside the man, her hands already moving to assess his condition. His skin was paper white, almost luminescent in the dim light, and cold as marble beneath her touch. No pulse at his wrist, no pulse at his neck. But he was still breathing. "Hey," she whispered, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" His eyes snapped open. They were the color of old silver, ancient and predatory, and they fixed on her face with an intensity that made her stomach clench. For a heartbeat, she saw something inhuman flicker behind his pupils, something that made her want to scramble backward, to put distance between herself and whatever this man really was. Instead, she pressed her fingers against his throat, searching for a pulse that wasn't there. His skin felt like ice, but his eyes burned with fever. Impossible. Everything about him was impossible. "Your heart," she breathed, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "It's not beating." His lips curved in what might have been a smile if it hadn't been so sharp. "No," he said, his voice like velvet over steel. "It hasn't beaten in centuries." The rational part of her mind screamed that she should run, should leave this strange, cold man to whatever fate had brought him to this alley. But her hands were already moving, checking his pupils, assessing the wound that carved a jagged line across his chest. The bleeding had stopped, but the edges of the gash looked wrong, infected, poisoned. "Silver," she said without thinking, then froze. How did she know that? How could she possibly know what had caused this wound just by looking? His silver eyes widened. "You can see it." "I can see that you're dying," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever you are." "Adrian." The name escaped his lips like a confession. "My name is Adrian Blackthorne." Natalie nodded, though something about the name made her chest tighten with recognition she couldn't place. "I'm Natalie, and I'm going to help you." She reached for the medical bag, her hands moving with that same impossible certainty. Sodium chloride to flush the wound. Anticoagulants that wouldn't work on normal blood but might help with whatever flowed in his veins. The knowledge came from nowhere, as if someone else's expertise had been downloaded into her muscle memory. Adrian's hand caught her wrist, his grip gentle despite the strength she could feel coiled beneath his skin. "You don't understand what you're offering." "I understand that you're hurt." She met his gaze, refusing to let the otherworldly gleam in his eyes intimidate her. "I understand that I can help." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Who are you?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "I don't know," she admitted, the words scraping her throat raw. "I woke up 3 days ago in Grant Hospital with no ID, no memory, no idea how I got there. But I know how to do this. She gestured to the medical supplies spread between them. I know how to save people. Even people like me? Especially people like you. She began cleaning the wound, her movements precise and methodical. The silver contamination was worse than she'd initially assessed. It had spread through his system like poison, turning his already pale skin a sickly gray. Without intervention, he would die within hours. The certainty of that diagnosis felt as solid as stone in her mind, though she couldn't explain how she knew. The silver is bonded to your cellular structure, she murmured, more to herself than to him. It's preventing your natural healing response, but if I can neutralize the binding agents... Adrian's eyes never left her face. You speak of vampiric physiology as if you've studied it. Vampire. The word should have sent her running, should have shattered whatever calm she'd managed to maintain. Instead, it settled into place like a puzzle piece she'd been missing. Of course he was a vampire. Of course that's why his heart didn't beat, why his skin felt like marble, why the silver wound refused to heal. Maybe I have, she said quietly. I can't remember. She drew a clear solution into a syringe, her hands steady despite the impossibility of what she was about to attempt. The compound would either neutralize the silver poisoning or kill him outright. The risk was enormous. The alternative was certain death. This is going to hurt, she warned. Adrian's laugh was dark as midnight. Pain and I are old friends. Natalie injected the solution directly into the wound. Adrian's body went rigid, his back arching off the concrete. A sound escaped him that wasn't quite human, a growl that seemed to vibrate through the alley walls. His fingers dug into the pavement, leaving gouges in the concrete. Then, impossibly, the wound began to close. The gray pallor faded from his skin. Color returned to his lips. The silver contamination dissolved like smoke, leaving behind healthy tissue that knitted itself together with supernatural speed. Within minutes, only a thin white scar remained where the gaping wound had been. Adrian sat up slowly, his silver eyes fixed on her face with something approaching awe. How? I don't know. The admission felt like failure. I just knew what to do. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small device, an encrypted flash drive, its surface etched with symbols she didn't recognize but somehow understood. This was in your medical bag, he said quietly, along with this. The second object made her breath catch. A locket, antique silver worked into intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the streetlight. The moment it touched her palm, images flashed through her mind. A sterile laboratory, rows of test subjects, her own hands drawing blood, taking samples, searching for something that remained just out of reach. Dr. Sarah Chen, Adrian said, and the name hit her like ice water. That's who you really are. The memories came in fragments. A research facility. Forbidden experiments. The taste of fear sharp on her tongue as she uncovered something that powerful people would kill to keep secret. And through it all, a face that looked like Adrian's, watching from the shadows. The Crimson Syndicate, she whispered, the words spilling from lips that remembered speaking them before. They're hunting me. Adrian's expression darkened. They've been hunting you for months. Ever since you tried to expose what they did to my people? He stood, moving with fluid grace despite his recent injury. The question is, do you trust me enough to let me protect you? Natalie looked down at the locket in her palm, at the flash drive that might contain the evidence she'd died trying to preserve. The rain continued to fall around them, washing the blood from the concrete, erasing the evidence of what had transpired here. But some things couldn't be erased. Some truths demanded to be told. What's on the drive? She asked. Everything, Adrian said simply. Every experiment, every victim, every crime the Syndicate committed in their search for immortality. His jaw tightened. including what they did to you. A car door slammed somewhere in the distance, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps on wet pavement. Adrian's head snapped toward the alley entrance, his body going perfectly still in the way of a predator scenting danger. "They've found us," he breathed. Natalie's hand closed around the locket, its metal surface warming against her palm. "Then we need to—" The footsteps drew closer, their rhythm deliberate and wrong, too synchronized, too purposeful. Natalie felt Adrian's hand close around her arm, his grip firm but careful, as if he was afraid she might shatter. The scent of rain and iron gave way to something else, ozone and copper, the smell of electrical burns and old blood. "This way." Adrian's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute command. He guided her deeper into the alley, away from the approaching sounds, his movements silent as smoke. Natalie followed, her medical bag clutched against her chest, the locket burning like a coal in her palm. They emerged onto a side street lined with abandoned warehouses, their broken windows staring down like dead eyes. Adrian led her to a sleek black sedan parked beneath a burned-out street lamp, its engine already running. The driver's seat was empty, but the car door stood open as if waiting for them. "Get in," Adrian said, but his attention was fixed on the mouth of the alley they'd just left. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, moving with the same unnatural grace that Adrian possessed. But where his presence felt controlled, theirs radiated hunger. Violence barely contained beneath expensive suits. Natalie slid into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she buckled the seatbelt. "Who are they?" "Marcus Corvelli's lieutenants." Adrian dropped behind the wheel, his movements fluid despite his recent injury. "The Syndicate's cleanup crew." The engine purred to life, and they pulled away from the curb just as the first gunshot shattered the rear window. Glass rained down on the leather seats. Natalie ducked instinctively, her medical bag spilling its contents across the floor. Syringes and vials scattered like dice, and among them, something else caught the light. A second flash drive, smaller than the first, hidden in a false bottom of her bag. "Jesus," she breathed, grabbing for it. The moment her fingers closed around the device, another wave of memories crashed over her. Not fragments this time, but full scenes playing out in perfect clarity. The Phoenix Research Laboratory. Sterile white walls and the constant hum of refrigeration units. Her own voice, younger and more confident, explaining her research to a room full of men in dark suits. The breakthrough that would change everything. A cure for the vampiric condition that had plagued certain bloodlines for centuries. "I remember," she gasped, the words torn from her throat. "I remember everything." Adrian's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, silver reflecting silver. "Tell me." Another gunshot rang out, closer this time. The sedan's engine roared as Adrian took a hard left, tires screaming against wet asphalt. But Natalie barely noticed. The memories were coming faster now, a flood of images and sensations that threatened to drown her. "The Crimson Syndicate wasn't trying to achieve immortality," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "They were trying to cure it. Marcus Corvelli's bloodline was dying out. Their vampiric abilities were fading with each generation. Without them, they were just mortal men with expensive suits and violent tendencies. And you found a way to restore what they'd lost. More than that." Natalie's fingers tightened around the flash drive. "I found a way to synthesize it, to create new vampires from ordinary humans, an army that would be completely loyal to whoever controlled the serum." The implications hung between them like a blade. Adrian's jaw tightened, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. They were racing through the industrial district now, past loading docks and chemical plants, leaving the city lights behind. "The test subjects," he said quietly. 12 volunteers. At least, that's what they told them. Natalie's voice broke. "Street kids, runaways, People no one would miss. The first injection killed 3 of them outright. The others. She closed her eyes, but the images were burned into her memory. The others became something else. Something hungry. A third gunshot echoed through the night, and this time Natalie saw the muzzle flash in the side mirror. Their pursuers had switched to motorcycles, sleek black machines that moved through traffic like sharks through water. The riders wore no helmets, their faces pale and sharp in the streetlights. "They found out you were documenting everything," Adrian said, taking another sharp turn. The sedan's tires fought for purchase on the rain-slick road, but he held the vehicle steady with supernatural precision. "I tried to destroy the research, tried to expose what they were doing." The memories were clearer now, each detail razor-sharp. But Marcus had leverage. He threatened to kill everyone I'd ever cared about if I didn't continue the work. "So you pretended to comply?" "I sabotaged it from the inside, changed the formulas, corrupted the data, made sure the serum would be useless." Natalie looked down at the flash drive in her palm. "But I kept the real research, the proof of what they'd done. I was going to take it to the FBI, to the CDC, to anyone who would listen." The sedan's engine began to sputter. Adrian cursed under his breath, his eyes scanning the dashboard. The fuel gauge sat at empty, its needle buried in the red. Impossible. The tank had been full when they'd started this chase. They shot the fuel line, Adrian realized. The engine coughed once more and died, leaving them coasting on momentum alone. He guided the sedan to the side of the road, next to a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Beyond it, the skeletal remains of an old factory complex stretched into the darkness. The smell of rust and decay drifted through the broken windows. "Can you run?" Adrian asked, his hand already on the door handle. "I think so." Natalie stuffed the flash drives into her jacket pocket and grabbed what she could from her medical bag. Her legs felt steady. Beneath her, adrenaline burning away the last of her confusion. They abandoned the sedan and slipped through a gap in the fence. The factory grounds were a maze of abandoned buildings and rusted machinery, perfect cover for what was coming. Adrian led her through the industrial graveyard with the confidence of someone who'd navigated such places before. "There," he said, pointing to a squat concrete building at the complex's heart. "My safe house." The motorcycle's engines grew louder behind them. Natalie could hear voices now, calling instructions to each other in a language that sounded like Italian mixed with something older. Something that made her skin crawl. They reached the safe house just as the first of their pursuers cleared the fence. Adrian pressed his palm against a scanner hidden beside the door, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. He pushed Natalie inside, then sealed the entrance behind them. The interior was spartanly furnished but clearly lived in. Medical equipment lined one wall, an EKG machine, defibrillator, enough supplies to run a small emergency room. A computer workstation occupied the opposite corner, its multiple monitors casting blue light across the concrete floor. "You've been preparing for this," Natalie said, "for months." Adrian moved to the computer station and began typing. "Ever since Marcus first came to me with his proposition, he wanted my bloodline's cooperation in his experiments, wanted access to the older vampiric strains that still carry true immortality. You refused. I told him to go to hell." Adrian's fingers flew across the keyboard. Security monitors flickered to life, showing multiple angles of the factory complex. Dark figures moved between the buildings, searching. "But I knew he wouldn't give up easily. Men like Marcus don't accept no for an answer." One of the monitors showed 3 vampires approaching the safe house. They moved with predatory grace, their pale faces turned upward as they scented the air. The leader, a tall man with silver hair and dead eyes, smiled when he caught their trail. "Vincent Torino," Adrian said, recognizing the face on screen. "Marcus's chief enforcer. He's the one who erased your memory." The name triggered another cascade of memories. Natalie remembered the laboratory's break room, working late into the night. The soft hiss of a needle sliding into her neck. Vincent's cold smile as consciousness faded. The desperate scramble to hide the flash drives before the darkness took her. He used a neural inhibitor, she whispered. Something designed to disrupt memory formation without causing permanent brain damage, but the effects were supposed to be temporary. Unless reinforced with regular treatments. Adrian's expression darkened. They've been dosing you for months, keeping you in a fugue state while they searched for the research you hid. The monitors showed more figures converging on their location. Too many to fight. Too many to escape. Vincent raised his hand, and the others spread out in a classic containment pattern. They had nowhere to run. The research, Adrian said urgently. What's on those drives? Natalie pulled both devices from her pocket. The larger one felt warm to the touch, its surface etched with the same symbols as her locket. The smaller drive was unmarked, innocuous except for the weight of secrets it carried. The first one contains all of Marcus's files, every experiment, every victim, every payment made to keep officials quiet. She held up the second drive. This one contains my real research, the actual formula for vampiric synthesis. The one that works. The one that works too well. Natalie's voice was grim. I created something that doesn't just restore vampiric abilities, it amplifies them, makes them stronger, faster, more resilient than any natural vampire. But it also makes them completely dependent on the serum. Without regular doses, they die within 72 hours. Adrian stared at her. A leash. A leash that Marcus could use to control an army of super vampires, creatures that would do anything he asked rather than face withdrawal and death. The sound of footsteps echoed from the building's roof. Vincent's team had found another way in. Adrian moved to a weapons cabinet and withdrew a modified crossbow, its bolts tipped with silver. He handed Natalie a smaller weapon, a pistol loaded with silver rounds. Do you remember how to use this? Natalie's hands found the weapon's grip with practiced ease. Some things you never forget. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing the safe house in red illumination. On the monitors, Vincent's team had split up. 2 were coming through the roof access, 1 through a ventilation shaft. They were trapped. There's another way out, Adrian said, moving to what looked like a solid wall. He pressed a hidden switch, and a section of concrete swung inward, revealing a tunnel beyond. It leads to the old subway system. From there, we can reach... The ceiling exploded inward. Vincent dropped through the opening like a falling angel, his coat billowing around him. He landed in a crouch, his dead eyes immediately finding Natalie's face. Dr. Sarah Chen, he said, his voice carrying a slight Italian accent. You've led us quite a chase. More vampires poured through the hole in the ceiling. 4 of them, moving with inhuman speed to surround Adrian and Natalie. Their weapons were antiques, ornate blades that gleamed with silver inlay, beautiful and deadly. Marcus sends his regards, Vincent continued, pulling on leather gloves. He's quite eager to resume your research. Of course, he understands that your recent amnesia may have caused some setbacks, but I'm sure we can help restore your motivation. Adrian stepped in front of Natalie, the crossbow steady in his hands. She's under my protection now. Vincent laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. The mighty Adrian Blackthorne. Do you know what we call you in the old country? The last king, the final heir to a bloodline that ruled Europe for 1,000 years. His smile turned predatory. But kingdoms fall, Adrian, even immortal ones. Not tonight. The first shot came from Adrian's crossbow, the silver bolt taking one of Vincent's lieutenants through the heart. The vampire screamed as the metal burned through his system, turning his blood to ash. He crumbled to dust before he hit the floor. Chaos erupted. Vincent's remaining men attacked with supernatural speed, their silver blades cutting the air like lightning. Adrian met them head-on, moving with a grace that made their assault look clumsy by comparison. But he was outnumbered, and Natalie could see the strain beginning to show. She raised the pistol and fired. The silver bullet caught one of the attackers in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second shot took him center mass, and he joined his companion as a pile of ash on the concrete floor. "Impressive," Vincent said, seemingly unconcerned by the loss of his men. "But ultimately, pointless." He moved faster than thought, crossing the distance to Natalie in a blur of motion. His hand closed around her throat, lifting her off her feet with casual strength. The pistol clattered to the floor. "The research doctor. Where is it?" Natalie's vision began to darken at the edges, but she managed to smile. "Go to hell." Vincent's grip tightened. "After you." Adrian's roar shook the building. He abandoned his fight with the remaining lieutenants and threw himself at Vincent, his movements pure predatory fury. They crashed into the computer station in a tangle of limbs and violence, monitors exploding in showers of sparks. Vincent released Natalie to deal with this new threat. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, her hand instinctively reaching for the flash drives in her pocket. Both were still there, their weight a small comfort against the chaos surrounding her. The two vampires fought with inhuman speed and strength, their battle tearing the safe house apart. Adrian was the better fighter, but Vincent had help. His remaining lieutenant flanked from the side, forcing Adrian to divide his attention. A blade found its mark. Adrian staggered, silver burning through his system like acid. Vincent pressed his advantage, his own weapon describing a silver arc through the air. Natalie's hand closed around a syringe from her scattered medical supplies. The same compound she'd used to save Adrian in the alley, but in a much higher concentration. Enough to neutralize silver poisoning in seconds, or to kill a human outright. She drove the needle into Vincent's neck before he could react. His eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed with rage. He spun toward her, murder written across his features. "What did you—" The compound hit his system like liquid fire. Vincent screamed, his perfect features contorting in agony. Silver began to leach from his pores, the metal that had been integrated into his enhanced physiology rejecting his cellular structure. He collapsed to his knees, then forward onto his face. Dead. Or as close to it as his kind could get. The remaining lieutenant froze, staring at his leader's still form. Adrian didn't give him time to process what had happened. The crossbow bolt took him through the heart, and he crumbled to ash like the others. Silence fell over the ruined safe house. Adrian slumped against the wall, silver burns marking his pale skin. But he was alive. They were both alive. "We need to move," Natalie said, helping him to his feet. "More will come." Adrian nodded, but his attention was fixed on Vincent's body. "He's not dead. That compound will only keep him down for a few hours. Then we'd better make them count." They gathered what supplies they could carry and headed for the hidden tunnel. As they reached the threshold, Natalie looked back at the devastation behind them. Vincent's team had been just the beginning. Marcus had resources she could barely imagine, connections that reached into every level of government and law enforcement. But she had something he wanted, something he needed. And for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, she knew exactly who she was and what she had to do. "The offshore laboratory," she said as they descended into the tunnel's darkness. "Marcus has been using it to continue the research. If we can get there, we can synthesize the cure," Adrian finished. "End this once and for all." The tunnel stretched ahead of them, a concrete throat leading toward an uncertain future. Behind them, Vincent stirred on the floor of the ruined safe house, his eyes opened, silver and filled with rage. "Soon," he whispered to the darkness. "Very soon." But his voice was lost in the sound of rushing water as Adrian and Natalie disappeared into Chicago's forgotten depths, carrying with them the secrets that would either save or damn them both. The hunt was far from over, but the hunted had become the hunters. And in 3 days' time, when Vincent's enhanced physiology finally purged the neutralizing compound from his system, he would discover that his prey had vanished like smoke into the city's steel and concrete maze, leaving behind only questions and the lingering scent of rain-washed streets. The real game was about to begin. The water beneath their feet ran black with decades of urban runoff, carrying the scent of rust and decay through the abandoned subway tunnel. Natalie's breath came in sharp puffs in the frigid air, each exhalation visible in the pale glow of Adrian's phone light. The concrete walls pressed close around them, weeping moisture that tasted of iron and forgotten time. "How much further?" she asked, her medical bag bouncing against her hip with each step. "2 miles to the harbor. Access." Adrian's voice echoed strangely in the confined space. His silver burns had begun to heal, but she could see the strain in his movements. "The laboratory is on a converted oil platform 12 miles offshore." Marcus thought the isolation would protect his research. A distant rumble vibrated through the tunnel floor. Not a train. The subway lines had been abandoned for years. Something else. Something hunting. "They're in the tunnels," Adrian said grimly. He pressed his palm against the concrete wall, and Natalie saw his eyes flutter closed in concentration. "Vincent's awake, and he's brought friends." The sound grew closer, multiple sets of footsteps moving with inhuman coordination through the darkness behind them. Natalie clutched the flash drives in her pocket, their weight a constant reminder of what they carried. The truth that could destroy Marcus Corvelli's empire, if they lived long enough to use it. They emerged from the tunnel into a vast underground chamber, part of Chicago's forgotten infrastructure. Massive support pillars stretched up into shadow, and the sound of lapping water echoed from somewhere ahead. Adrian led her through a maze of rusted machinery toward a narrow pier where a speedboat waited, its hull gleaming black in the darkness. "You planned this," Natalie realized. "I've been planning this for months." Adrian's fingers flew over the boat's control panel, bringing the engines to life. "Ever since I realized what Marcus was really after. Your research wasn't just about creating vampires, it was about creating the perfect weapon." The boat pulled away from the pier with a low growl of engines. Behind them, shouts echoed through the underground chamber. Vincent's voice, sharp with rage and promise of violence. But they were already moving into the tunnel that led to Lake Michigan, the city's lights fading behind them. The lake stretched dark and endless before them, its surface broken by whitecaps that caught the moon's reflection. Adrian pushed the engines harder, the speedboat cutting through the water like a blade. The wind carried the scent of rain and something else, ozone and electricity. A storm was coming. "Tell me about the cure," Adrian said over the engine noise. Natalie pulled the smaller flash drive from her pocket, its surface warm against her palm. "The vampiric condition isn't a curse. It's a symbiotic virus that integrates with the host's cellular structure. The original strains were elegant, sustainable. But Marcus's enhanced version is different. It's like a cancer that feeds on itself. That's why you created the compound I've been taking. A stopgap measure. It slows the degradation, but it doesn't cure it." She looked at him across the boat's small cabin. "The real cure requires a complete cellular reset, a controlled death and resurrection at the molecular level." Adrian's hands tightened on the wheel. "Controlled death. For 72 hours, your body would be clinically dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity, no metabolic function. The virus would starve and die with the host cells. Then the resurrection serum would trigger cellular regeneration, rebuilding your system from the genetic baseline. And if something goes wrong, then you stay dead." The oil platform appeared on the horizon like a steel island floating on black water. Industrial lights blazed from its superstructure, and Natalie could make out figures moving on the landing platform. Marcus's people. They were expected. He knows we're coming, she said. Of course he knows. Adrian cut the engines and let the boat drift toward the platform's shadow. Vincent would have reported our escape, but Marcus wants what you carry more than he wants us dead. For now. For now. They tied off at a maintenance dock on the platform's underside, away from the main landing. The steel structure groaned in the wind, and the smell of petroleum and salt water filled the air. Adrian led her up a service ladder, their movement silent despite the platform's constant industrial noise. The laboratory occupied the platform's upper levels, a maze of sterile corridors and reinforced glass. Natalie felt a chill of recognition as they moved through the familiar layout. This was where it had all begun, where she'd created the research that Marcus now used to build his empire. The synthesis lab is on level 3, she whispered. That's where we'll need to. The corridor lights flickered and died. Emergency illumination kicked in, bathing everything in red. And in that crimson glow, Marcus Corvelli stepped out of the shadows. He was smaller than Natalie had expected, a compact man in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the predatory grace in his movements. His dark hair was silver at the temples, and his eyes held the cold intelligence of a creature that had lived far too long. Dr. Sarah Chen, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent. Welcome home. Vampires emerged from concealment around them. A dozen of them, moving with the enhanced speed and strength that her research had given them. They wore tactical gear and carried silver-edged weapons, their pale faces expressionless in the red light. You brought my property back to me, Marcus continued, gesturing toward the flash drives in Natalie's pocket. How thoughtful. It's not your property, Adrian said. His crossbow was already in his hands, though they were hopelessly outnumbered. It never was. Marcus laughed. Everything is property, Adrian. Knowledge, power, life itself. The only question is, who owns it? One of his lieutenants stepped forward, a woman with short blonde hair and scars across her neck. Shall we take them, sir? Carefully, Isabella. Dr. Chen is quite valuable. As for Mr. Blackthorne? Marcus's smile turned predatory. He's served his purpose, but perhaps we can find a use for him yet. The attack came from all sides at once. Adrian's crossbow sang, silver bolts finding their marks with deadly precision. But there were too many of them, and they moved with inhuman coordination. Within seconds, they were overwhelmed. Isabella's blade found the gap in Adrian's guard, silver burning through his system like acid. He collapsed to his knees, the crossbow clattering across the steel floor. Hands seized Natalie's arms, forcing her toward Marcus. The research doctor. Both drives. Now. Natalie looked at Adrian, seeing the pain etched across his features. The silver was spreading through his system, turning his blood to ash. He had minutes before the poisoning killed him. She pulled the drives from her pocket and held them out. The cure for you. Marcus nodded to Isabella, who produced a syringe filled with clear liquid. The antidote for the silver poisoning. A fair trade. No, Adrian gasped. Don't. Give him. Isabella drove the needle into his neck, and the compound flooded his system. The burning stopped immediately, silver leaching from his pores as his enhanced physiology fought off the toxin, but his eyes never left Natalie's face. I'm sorry, she whispered. Marcus took the drives with reverent care, his fingers tracing their surfaces. 15 years of research, the key to evolution itself. He looked up at her with something like affection. You've given me the future, Doctor. I've given you hell. His smile faltered. What? The drives are encrypted with a time-release virus. The moment you plug them in, every file will corrupt itself beyond recovery. You'll have exactly 30 seconds to read the data before it all dissolves into random code. Marcus's face went white with rage. You're lying. Try me. For a moment, the only sound was the platform's industrial humming and the wind howling outside. Then Marcus gestured to his men. Bring them both. If she's telling the truth, we'll need her alive to recreate the research. If she's lying, he smiled coldly. Well, we'll find more creative uses for them. They were dragged deeper into the platform, past laboratories filled with equipment that Natalie recognized from her nightmares. Test chambers where Marcus's enhanced vampires had been created. Holding cells where the failures had died screaming. The smell of antiseptic couldn't mask the underlying stench of suffering. The main laboratory was a cathedral of science and horror. Gleaming steel tables surrounded by monitoring equipment. Refrigeration units filled with samples of her stolen research. And at the center of it all, a single chair fitted with restraints and IV lines. The synthesis chamber, Marcus said proudly, where we'll create the new world order. One enhanced vampire at a time. It won't work, Natalie said. The process is unstable without the complete genetic template. You'll just create more monsters. Then you'll fix it. He nodded to Isabella, who forced Natalie into the chair. You'll recreate your research from memory, or Mr. Blackthorne will die very slowly. The restraints clicked shut around her wrists and ankles. IV lines slid into her arms with professional efficiency. But as Isabella worked, Natalie caught her eye and saw something there. Something that didn't belong in a vampire's cold gaze. Humanity. The drives, Marcus said, moving to a computer terminal. Let's see how clever you really are, Doctor. He inserted the first drive, his fingers poised over the keyboard. The screen flickered to life, displaying a menu of encrypted files. Marcus began to type, his movements quick and confident. The 30-second countdown began in Natalie's head. She watched Marcus's face as he accessed file after file, his expression growing more triumphant with each revelation. Her research was all there, every formula, every test result, every failure and breakthrough. But buried in the code, invisible to casual inspection, was her final gift to the world. A virus that would do more than corrupt the data. It would transmit their location to every law enforcement agency on the planet. FBI, CDC, Interpol. Everyone who had been hunting Marcus for years. 20 seconds. 15. 10. Marcus looked up from the screen, his eyes bright with victory. Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. With this, we can create an army that will... The screen went black. Then it began to display random characters, scrolling faster and faster as the virus consumed every file on the drive. Marcus's face went through a spectrum of emotions, confusion, anger, and finally, cold rage. You destroyed it, he whispered. I told you I would. Then you'll recreate it. From memory. Starting now. He gestured to Isabella, who approached with another syringe. A neural enhancer. It will help you remember every detail of your research. Unfortunately, it's also quite painful. Wait. Adrian's voice cut through the laboratory's artificial quiet. He had been silent since their capture, but now he struggled against the vampires holding him. There's something you don't know about the cure. Marcus paused, the syringe halfway to Natalie's IV line. Speak. It doesn't just cure vampirism, it cures mortality. Adrian's eyes found Natalie's across the room. The cellular reset process doesn't just eliminate the virus, it optimizes the host's genetic structure. Perfect health, perfect regeneration, practical immortality without the vampiric curse. Marcus lowered the syringe slowly. Impossible. Test it on me, Adrian said. If I'm lying, you lose nothing. If I'm telling the truth, he smiled grimly. You gain everything. Natalie understood. He was buying her time, offering himself as a test subject. But the cure was untested, experimental. The chances of survival were minimal at best. No, she said firmly. I won't do it. You will, Marcus said, his voice soft with promise. Because if you don't, I'll start removing pieces of Mr. Blackthorne until you change your mind. Isabella moved to the computer terminal, bypassing the corrupted drives to access the platform's research database. Sir, we have enough of her original notes to attempt a synthesis. It won't be perfect, but it might work. Do it. The next hour passed in a blur of forced collaboration. Natalie directed the synthesis process under duress, her hands shaking as she manipulated compounds that could either cure or kill. Adrian was strapped to a medical table, monitors tracking his vital signs as the experimental serum dripped into his bloodstream. The cure worked in stages. First, cellular shutdown as his enhanced physiology began to fail. His heartbeat slowed, then stopped altogether. Brain activity flatlined. For 72 minutes, not hours but minutes in this accelerated version, Adrian Blackthorne was clinically dead. Fascinating, Marcus murmured, watching the monitors. The virus is actually consuming itself, breaking down the cellular modifications. If this works, it will work, Natalie said quietly. She had made one crucial modification to the formula, something Marcus's people couldn't detect without sophisticated analysis. The cure would restore Adrian to perfect human health, but it would also trigger a massive immune response that would create antibodies to the vampiric virus. Antibodies that could be extracted and synthesized into a weapon. The resurrection phase began automatically, triggered by pre-programmed cellular commands. Adrian's heart stuttered, then began beating with steady rhythm. His brain activity returned in cascading waves. His eyes opened, silver no more, but warm brown. How do you feel? Marcus asked eagerly. Adrian sat up slowly, testing his movements. Different. Human. He looked at his hands, flexing fingers that no longer possessed supernatural strength. It worked. Excellent. Marcus turned to Natalie with renewed enthusiasm. Now we begin mass production. Isabella, prepare the other subjects. I'm afraid that won't be happening. The new voice came from the laboratory's entrance. FBI agents poured into the room, their weapons trained on Marcus and his people. Leading them was a man in a dark suit, his badge gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. Agent Morrison, FBI. His voice carried the authority of federal law enforcement. Marcus Corvelli, you're under arrest for human trafficking, murder, and conspiracy. The laboratory erupted in chaos. Marcus's enhanced vampires moved with inhuman speed, but the agents were ready for them. Silver bullets and UV grenades turned the sterile room into a battlefield. Isabella shielded Natalie from the worst of it, her scarred face grim with determination. This way, she said, cutting the restraints. Quickly. You're helping us? I was never one of them. Isabella's eyes held pain that went deeper than her physical scars. I was one of the test subjects, the only one who survived with her humanity intact. They fought their way through the chaos toward an emergency exit. Adrian moved beside them, his newly human reflexes slower but still effective. Behind them, Marcus screamed orders in the ancient language, but his empire was crumbling around him. The platform's going to explode, Isabella said as they reached the evacuation pods. Marcus has a dead man's switch. If he can't have the research, he'll destroy everything. The pod launched just as the first explosions rocked the platform. They watched from the water as Marcus Corvelli's floating laboratory disappeared in a pillar of fire and smoke. The Crimson Syndicate's greatest weapon had become its funeral pyre. Hours later, they sat in the FBI's Chicago field office, giving statements that would put the remaining Syndicate members in prison for life. The flash drives had served their purpose. The virus had transmitted enough evidence to law enforcement agencies worldwide to dismantle Marcus's network completely. What happens now? Natalie asked Agent Morrison. Witness protection, if you want it. New identities, new lives. The Syndicate is finished. But there might be stragglers looking for revenge. No, Adrian said firmly. We've run enough. Natalie looked at him. seeing the man he had become. Fully human now, but somehow more powerful than he'd ever been as a vampire. The cure had given him something he'd lost centuries ago: hope. "There's still work to do," she said. "Other victims of the experiments. People who need help recovering from what Marcus did to them." "A clinic?" Adrian suggested. "Somewhere we can use your research to help instead of harm." Morrison nodded approvingly. The Bureau would be interested in consulting on similar cases. This kind of bioweapon research is becoming more common. 3 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen opened the doors of the Blackthorne Recovery Center in a renovated warehouse on Chicago's South Side. The facility specialized in treating victims of illegal medical experimentation, using techniques derived from her cure research to help damaged bodies heal. Adrian worked beside her, no longer immortal, but somehow more alive than he'd been in centuries. His criminal empire had been dismantled, its resources redirected toward legitimate aid organizations. The last king had become something better: a healer. Isabella served as head of security, her enhanced vampiric abilities used to protect those who could no longer protect themselves. The scars on her neck had faded, but the strength they represented remained. On quiet evenings, Natalie would walk through the center's halls and listen to the sounds of recovery. Children laughing in the recreation room, teenagers learning job skills in the workshop, adults finding their way back to humanity after months or years in Marcus's laboratories. The locket still hung around her neck, its weight a reminder of how far she'd traveled from that rain-soaked alley where Adrian had first found her. Sometimes she would catch Adrian looking at it, and she would see in his eyes the same wonder she felt every day. They had survived the darkness. They had found each other in the depths of their mutual pain. And in choosing to heal rather than harm, they had discovered something that neither vampiric immortality nor scientific brilliance could provide. They had found redemption. The storm that had threatened that night on Lake Michigan had passed, leaving the air clean and bright with possibility. And in the morning light that streamed through the center's windows, casting rainbow patterns on the polished floor, Natalie could finally see the future clearly. It stretched ahead of them like an open road, filled with the promise of lives saved and souls healed, human, mortal, perfect.